Welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, September 23rd, 2024, and today we are going to be talking about Nebraska's 2nd Congressional District. Nebraska is one of 2 states in the entire country that decides to determine its electoral votes by a statewide elected popular vote, on top of each congressional district having one electoral vote to make a decision as to how they are going to vote in the upcoming presidential election. Nebraska and Maine are the 2 states in the entire country that have this system in terms of how they allocate their electoral college votes. Beyond these 2 states, every other state is what we traditionally know as a winner-take-all system when it comes down to the electoral college map. And today, just in fact, about 30 minutes ago, a key Nebraska Republican legislator announced that he would not be backing the decision to change the electoral vote count and how it is tallied in the state of Nebraska, having a big defeat for Donald Trump and his allies as they renewed a major push across the state, combining forces with the 2 Republican state senators, the 3 Republicans in the House of Representatives, combined with the governor of the state and Donald Trump himself, having a heavy hand in trying to convey and try to convince the Republicans in the state legislature to make a decision right before the election to make Nebraska a winner-take-all state. Now, you might be wondering, why is it that this video is so focused on Nebraska's 2nd Congressional District? Why is it that this district holds so much importance that Republicans would be worried about it 43 days out from Election Day, that they would change their entire years of history in the state of Nebraska as to how they allocate their electoral vote? Well, I want us to really explore when we're looking at the state of Nebraska in the 2024 election and what it could mean for the general election cycle, what it could mean for Kamala Harris's potential victory, or maybe not necessarily victory. Now, the first thing is that it would require Kamala Harris to win some battleground states that she is currently expected to win, like Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, that are important battleground states that are being contested on both sides of the aisle. But what would be important here is that it would require Kamala Harris to win these states and practically no other battleground states. If we're looking at an electoral map that gets us right to 270, the pathway actually lies through the Rust Belt and Nebraska's 2nd District. Now, I'm not going to spend time characterizing all the states that we determine to be safe or lean or likely. We're just going to go ahead and characterize them as red or blue because they do want to save us some time here. But what we get at here is Colorado, New Mexico, Virginia, Minnesota, New Hampshire, all states that in theory are more competitive, in reality are going to Kamala Harris. That puts her at roughly 225 electoral votes. Combined with Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin, she is just 1 electoral vote short of the 2024 or any election year standard, which is 270 electoral votes, which means Nebraska's 2nd district would be the district that puts her over the top. And so Republicans looked at this and were quite worried about what this would mean for the impact of this election cycle. Should Kamala Harris only win the Rust Belt region, Nebraska's 2nd district might be the actual reason why that district at large gives their electoral vote to Kamala Harris and thus the presidency at just 270 electoral votes. And so Donald Trump and his allies noticed this very quickly, and they tried to do this back in April and said that we're going to go ahead and move forward and say that we need a winner-take-all system. They got all the Republicans on board yet again, and at that point in time, everybody said no. Now, back then, it was a bit of a question as to whether or not they were actually truly saying no, because the Maine legislature and the Maine president of the Senate responded, who is a Democrat, and said that, you know what, if you do this, we will change the system too and make it so Maine no longer allocates their electoral votes by congressional district, and thus we're at an overall net equilibrium, and Donald Trump and Kamala Harris would be just as well off with Nebraska and Maine now no longer being states that decide their electoral vote count by congressional district. But so the Nebraska Republicans decided to wait. They allowed it to fail initially back in April. Obviously, it failed today, but what they were looking for was that it would fail back in April. So everyone would disarm. The Maine Democrats wouldn't focus on this. And so what happened was that the Maine legislature ended their session. The Maine legislature no longer was able to pass a bill. And the problem is that in the state of Maine, in order for bills to take effect, they need a certain amount of time before they can actually be in effect to change any law across the state. So the legislature has no ability to change the law tomorrow. It would have to be, roughly 3 months out for the election laws to change. And so the Nebraska Republicans really waited until it came down to a position where Democrats no longer could call the shots in the state of Maine, meaning that Democrats could not respond adequately even if they wanted to. And so the Republicans went back into Nebraska and decided to make that change, decided to say, or at least try to make that change. Obviously, it's not going to happen. But what they tried to say here was saying, we are going to change the way the state awards their electoral votes. Let's go ahead and push back for it. And they waited on this one Republican, who was actually a Democrat before, who switched political parties back in April. He's a representative near the city of Omaha. He's a very, very well-known guy who's actually expected to run for mayor of Omaha sometime in the future. And so everyone was looking to him as this one Republican who actually is the reason why Democrats lost their ability to filibuster in the state of Nebraska. So when the initial conversations were happening around the change of electoral vote tally, he was a Democrat. Back in February, March, and April, when these conversations were first being had across the state, he was in opposition. He was a Democrat at the time, and Democrats had a filibuster. They had a filibuster number. It's a unicameral legislature, but, overall, no Senate, no House. It's all one legislature. And it's actually the only legislature in the country that has a working filibuster. And so Democrats were going to utilize that to prevent any votes on this in the future. When he switched over to the Republican side, Republicans also saw that as an increased opportunity that maybe he was more willing to back Republicans on proposals such as this. Maybe he was more willing to back Donald Trump's proposal, that would ultimately make Nebraska this winner-take-all state. But he announced today that he just simply couldn't do it. And there were a variety of different reasons I think many people were in initial apprehension to this, right? Obviously, those in Washington, D.C. are a bit more disconnected than those in the state of Nebraska, but even the Republican governor was on board with this. And everyone sort of sees this as, them doing a favor to Donald Trump. He came into this state, sent many of his surrogates to really advocate to these state legislative members to really try to get them to change the electoral vote tally. And the overwhelming majority of Republicans were entirely on board. And the reason for that was because, one, they never liked the idea that Nebraska could, in theory, go to the Democratic Party, that any of their districts could flip away from the remainder of the state, despite 48 other states going with the winner-take-all system. So Republicans really weren't thrilled after the 2020 election when Democrats won in Nebraska's 2nd district. But they didn't really bring back up that conversation after April for a bunch of different reasons. One, it was really good for the Omaha market. Democrats and Republicans spent a combined over $10 million in the Omaha region that wouldn't otherwise be spent in the state of Nebraska. There wouldn't be any campaign rallies in the state of Nebraska. It's a solid red state, and so there would be no electoral incentive for Democrats to even touch any of the districts across the state. Beyond that point, too, what they were looking at is that Nebraska is a state that has had this deep-rooted history in it for about 30 years now about voting by electoral vote count, that some voters in Omaha might also reject the Republican Party in its entirety, not necessarily enough to make the state flip blue by any metric, but enough so that in the mayoral race, they would no longer vote for this guy who very clearly was eyeing it up. They would no longer vote for Republicans in some of the down-ballot races, and it would cause a bit of drama and trouble for the Republican Party in an area which they typically do well in, despite it being a very blue area. And so a combination of factors ultimately led to this decision now from the Republican legislator to say, I'm not backing this change. And with just the number of electoral votes or just number of voting power in the state legislature, the Democratic Party combined with this Republican is enough to block the change. And so one electoral vote truly has caused so much controversy in the state of Nebraska. But these Republicans, and this Republican in specific, is really trying to make sure that this state is no longer seen as a flyover state by many members of the political arena. Again, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are spending and investing in this district solely because of this one electoral vote, because everybody knows how important every single vote cast in this election actually is. And if Democrats are spending that much money in the media market, it translates to a benefit for constituents in that area. And Republicans know it, Democrats know it, but this was really just a partisan effort from Donald Trump and his colleagues to change the voting system. They tried to do it before, they tried to do it now, and ultimately it failed. Now, Nebraska has historically been pretty strong for the Republican Party. But one time recently, in the 21st century, did it also have Nebraska's 2nd district vote for the Democrat despite the entire state voting for the Republican, and that was in 2008. Now, in 2008, there wasn't as much, or 2009, rather, there weren't as many calls to change the voting system in the state of Nebraska. And a big reason for that was because Donald Trump was not the person leading the Republican Party, right? Back then, it was John McCain who ultimately lost the presidential election, and it was largely seen as inconsequential. It doesn't matter as much as it would in this election, especially in a scenario where that one electoral vote can make all the difference. Barack Obama won Nebraska's 2nd district by roughly 2 points, so it wasn't even like it was a blowout, it wasn't massive, it wasn't super impressive. It was a victory in Nebraska's 2nd that actually was about 5 points behind that of President Biden when he won the district back in 2020. So when Barack Obama won the 2nd district, but the one electoral vote from Nebraska, it tallied up to a 365 electoral vote total, right? Nearly 200 more electoral votes than John McCain. It was an electoral college blowout, massive, massive victory for Barack Obama, and it wasn't really in a position where anyone could really argue that Nebraska mattered or was a district that really made all the difference. And of course, Republicans also loved the amount of media attention Omaha was getting, the campaign stops from both the McCain team and the Barack Obama team. They were focused on Nebraska. Obama had stops there in October and in September. He knew this one electoral vote was in play, and so did Republicans. Then in 2012, it went back to the Republican Party. Barack Obama didn't win the 2nd district there. Mitt Romney expanded on the margin, won the state of Nebraska by roughly 21 points. Then in 2016, Donald Trump won the state by 25 points. So again, plus 16 for McCain, plus 20 for Romney, plus 25 for Trump. And then in 2020, ended up being roughly plus 19 for Donald Trump. But that 2nd district shifted away from the Republican Party, and Democrats won it across Omaha and the outskirts by roughly 7 points. And then after the 2020 census, the Republicans in Nebraska tried to gerrymander Nebraska's 2nd district. They tried to make it about 3 to 4 points more Republican. It's really hard to do so when you have such a populous city that is just churning out Democratic votes, but they tried to make it more conservative. But even in recent data points, we are finding that Kamala Harris is leading Donald Trump in some cases by the margin that Joe Biden won by back in 2020. But in some cases, like the one we're seeing here from Remington Research Group, which actually in the past had leaned a little bit more towards the right, showed Kamala Harris with an 8-point upper hand, an expansion on Joe Biden's margin from the 2020 election. So the urgency here really was for Republicans, that maybe it could be the one electoral vote that if it goes to Donald Trump, it throws the entire electoral college and the election itself to the House of Representatives, because what it would be is a 269 to 269 tie, which actually is in line with a lot of the polling data that we're looking at today. Granted, the upper hand right now for Kamala Harris is the fact that she is in the state of Nevada, currently leading when it comes down to the polls, but every other state, as of recent polls, North Carolina, Georgia, and Arizona, especially with new polls out today, yesterday, and the day before, the combined average here is that Donald Trump maintains roughly a 0.2 to a 1.5 average lead in these 3 battleground states. It's reasonable to expect that Nevada, if any state was to flip to the Republican Party, it would be that one, and what it would result in is a 269 to 269 constitutional crisis that would really put our electoral college and the validity of our elections to test by sending it to the House of Representatives and the vice presidency to the United States Senate. And so that's what Donald Trump was hoping for in one weird type of scenario where we're in a 269 to 269 tie. But because this fails today, it would allow Kamala Harris to win the Electoral College just narrowly at 270 electoral votes. It would be the closest election in United States history. It would be something that we would likely remember for the rest of our lives as a close and competitive race that was ultimately decided through the Rust Belt and through one particular congressional district that seems to be so keen on electing Democrats despite the rest of the state wanting to vote red. Now, Nebraska has seen a push now from these Republicans who have decided to not back it, including the Democrats, who say, let's let the voters decide. And honestly, I do expect the state of Nebraska to completely get rid of this electoral college system. But what I also expect is that the Maine Democratic Party will likely follow suit as well. I can imagine by the 2028 race, Maine no longer has congressional district voting, and neither does Nebraska. And we're back to where we are on a 50-state map. Every single state is winner take all, and both states sort of lose money and lose engagement from national press, lose engagement from national media, and lose engagement from national candidates who worry about these individual districts. Donald Trump spent time in Maine back in 2016 and 2020, and so did the Clinton and Biden campaigns. Same thing in Nebraska, and now we're seeing the same thing with the Harris and Trump campaigns in 2024. Nebraska's second is a target. Maine's second is a target. The only reason they are targets is because the state law allows them to be. But I can imagine in about 4 years, neither of these two states will have electoral votes that are split and able to go away from their side of the aisle that the state at large decides to vote for. And so I found this to be a really fascinating power struggle and, a tussle between Republicans in the state legislature and Democrats in the state legislature and Donald Trump and the backing of the national GOP. Senator Lindsey Graham from South Carolina went out to Nebraska to meet with numerous state legislators, saying, I'm here on behalf of the Trump campaign. We really need you to make this done. And like I said, many Republicans were willing to follow through with it. But they needed every Republican, not just a few. They needed every single Republican. And that didn't happen. Republicans and Democrats joined forces, some of them, deciding to push back on this. They decided that this simply was something that just couldn't happen right now in the state legislature, 43 days out from the election. The argument was quite right, but it's very clear why Republicans decided to wait in the first place, because they knew that the state of Maine would likely retaliate and change their election law as well. But Nebraska and Maine right now are in a position where it's only a matter of time before they decide to vote against where they are right now and decide to vote ultimately that they are going to be allocating by a winner-take-all system. But as of now, Donald Trump spent months on end being relentless about this, meeting with many of the top officials, getting the governor involved, the 2 Republican senators, all 3 Republican representatives. I mean, they did any and everything they could to try to make this happen. But the Republicans in Nebraska and the Democrats joined forces and shot it down. And what this means now is that 43 days out from the election, Republicans will not be changing the law. And that means Nebraska's 2nd District is free to vote how it wants to, which means it'll likely vote for Vice President Harris, which means in a scenario like this, could be that one electoral vote that puts Kamala Harris over the top and awards her the presidency for 4 years, all because of one individual district in one individual state, probably being the most important district and most important vote ever cast in recent history, and something that will likely be remembered for decades to come about American politics and the impact of relationships in a state legislature, impact of relationships on the congressional and on the national map, and what this individual district meant and did for the Democratic and Republican parties, because right now it truly could mean the difference between victory and loss for both sides of the aisle, and it looks like the Democrats today came out with the upper hand. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 presidential election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.